Ladies and gentlemen, I am Laura Buckwell, and we are here live at the Digital Wellbeing Summit, seeking the digital truth, here at the wonderful King Abdulaziz Centre for World Culture here in Ithra. Well, today we are now going to explore the extent to which startups are able to leverage the technological change we've been discussing over the past day or so. This is a conversation about startups, and we have a very special guest with us here today. How many times have you been told that will never work? Well, I'm sure it's not as many times as our next guest. You might know him as the co-founder of Netflix, but he's actually, in fact, a startup mentor, an angel investor, a best-selling author of That'll Never Work, and host of the top 10 Apple podcast that goes by the same name. It's a great pleasure to welcome to the stage Marc Randolph. Marc, truly wonderful to have you here today. Thank you so much for making the time for us.
Oh, it's a pleasure. It's great to be here.
Right, I'd like to sort of get straight into this. As someone that's been in the startup ecosystem for quite some time now, you've seen multiple cycles of exactly what a startup is. So how would you describe the role of a startup in today's climate?
Well, I think the role of a startup in today's climate is the same as the role of a startup in any day's climate, which essentially it's companies trying to do something that hasn't been done before. It's people who see the world as somewhat of an imperfect place, who say, there's a hole, well, can I fill it? There's a problem, can I fix it? Why isn't there? Why can't we? But instead of just complaining, step in and say, let's make that happen.
So now we've talked about how there is a societal disruption going on. Do you feel that the startup growth model today is adequate for that? And is it time to sort of redefine the success metrics of a startup today?
Well, yes and no. I think that we're learning more and more about what steps a person who has an idea can take to actually make their idea real. In other words, this process of being a startup. And I think those are the same almost regardless of what problem you're trying to solve. I mean, the fundamental big thing to do is you have to start. You have to begin to gather a team of people to help you. You have to do trial and error and experimentation. And those are fundamental behaviors of a startup, whether they're trying to do something which is purely capitalistic driven, or whether they have a passion to try and do something good for the planet, good for their fellow people, good for themselves. And I think that's an important distinction, is that, yes, there are some subtle differences for what's changing today in people's consciousness that this can't be raw capitalism. But I think the very process you go about to try and build an organization to address that is actually pretty similar.
Is that very much a sort of trend that you're seeing going forward in terms of being more socially responsible within these startups as well?
Oh, absolutely. Essentially, startups, and most businesses in fact, respond to what people want. It's almost a recipe for failure to say, I don't care if anyone wants it, I'm going to build something and I'm going to shove it down their throat. It has to be the opposite direction. You have to be able to anticipate what are people going to want. And yes, you're looking a bit into the future. What do people want a year from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now? But it has to be real. And that's just a way of saying that I think this trend towards social responsibility is very real. And with each passing year, as another generation, well, I guess generations don't come once a year, but basically with every passing year, as more people come into the market, as people get older, we're just seeing more and more people recognize I have to be responsible. Responsible in my buying, responsible in the services I use, and absolutely a whole generation of startups is going to rise up to serve that market. This is not altruism. This is saying there's a need here, and I think we can find opportunity there.
Because whatever the consumer wants, an entrepreneur and a startup is basically going to find a way to deliver that, aren't they?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's a skill which is basically not necessarily building the thing which is needed today, but building the skill, building something which basically says, what is my market going to want some point in the future? and I'm going to try and move my way forward toward that. And so absolutely, I think what's happening is each passing year, I'm seeing more and more of it. I'm seeing people trying to do things with water, trying to things with the environment. I'm trying to see people doing things with mental health. I mean, it's very, very consistent that there's a market here.
So how do you think this new sort of model and this growth trend is affecting one's ability to raise capital then? As sort of many investors are still looking very much at an old model, aren't they? But is this sort of the way going forward then?
So I certainly work from the operator side, which is I either do my own startups or more frequently I'm coaching other entrepreneurs to do their startups. But there is absolutely an entire community of people who are saying our role in this is the money. They're the venture capitalists. And they are seeing the world exactly the same way that I am. They're trying to say, what are the future trends that we can address? They're raising funds to address those things. And again, this is not altruism. This is them recognizing that there's a genuine financial opportunity to be staking the startups that are addressing those issues, and not just out of the goodness of their heart. They have the exact same expectations they would if they were funding any startup, which is, we're going to give you money, but we want it back, and we want it back hopefully times a very large multiple. And they're very competitive. There's a tremendous amount of money right now chasing a relatively small amount of companies, and so every venture firm is saying, how can I differentiate myself? How can I identify a trend somewhere out in the future that I can be known for? And originally, when I first began working in this space, which was probably 10 or 11 years ago, there was only a handful of venture firms who were doing socially responsible investing. Again, not because they were philanthropists, because they saw opportunity there. But now I see more and more and more companies who are venture firms who are recognizing, I think we can make money in this space. And that's good news for everybody here who is trying to do a startup which actually has a socially responsible purpose to it.
Do you think in today's climate that's actually, in fact, make or break when it comes to investment?
I'm
to
sorry?
have a more socially responsible outlook, is that make or break for investors coming in from an investor point of view?
Is it make or break?
Yeah.
No, there's no bright line where they're evaluating you on how pure your model is. They're really saying that they're responding to their general partners who are basically saying, we're putting money with you, with the understanding that this is your investment premise. But there's no litmus test. And it can be interpreted fairly broadly. I mean, for example, I said that many, many years ago I'd started with working with one firm because a company that I was mentoring, they were basically doing not to get too technical, but a two-sided marketplace for rental, connecting people who needed tools with companies who might be able to rent tools. And you might say, well, that seems extremely commercial. And in some ways it is, but it was not entirely that, because we recognized that by facilitating rental, we were actually helping by diminishing raw consumerism, that every product that could be reused was actually good for the planet, good for the environment. And our investors saw the exact same thing in us. So there's lots of things. Another company, for example, that I'm working with is doing water availability. And if anyone who's been to the airport recently sees people wandering around with metal water bottles, and that is not necessarily an economic consideration, it's an environmental consideration. And at an airport, you do now frequently find places you can fill, but not many other places. And they recognized, as entrepreneurs do, here is an open hole in the market that we can fill by building a directory of places to find and fill a water bottle. Now, is that a business? Absolutely. And in fact, if you saw the business plan, very, very concrete objectives, very, very specific metrics they wanted to meet, very, very clear model for making money. But if they were successful, was that a good thing for the planet? Absolutely. And their investors were happy to invest in something like that.
So what would you say are the ultimate success metrics for any startup in today's climate? And should the impact that technology has on our lives be a part of that metric going forward as well?
Metrics is not a one-size-fits-all equation. And in fact, it's a dangerous thing to believe that it is, to think we just need to measure number of users, we need to measure revenue, whatever you think they are, it's not. Metrics are something you use for yourself to help steer, to know how fast you're going, to know what direction you're going, to know whether you're making progress. And one of the most complicated things to do is figure out what the right metrics are for your business. I mean, basically, there's the expression that says, you treasure what you measure, so you would better measure the right things. And yes, you're going to have to track the economic pieces of your model, but you also have to say what else is important. And looking back, 15 years or so ago, back at the rise of the large social networks we see today, the metrics that they believed were critical were pretty simple. It was number of users, and engagement. Engagement measured basically by how long you spent staring at the screen. And I think we've begun to realize that that may be a powerful economic model because that generates the advertising dollars, but it has a very severe societal cost. So instead you go, okay, let's say I have a model for a different social network that is designed to not have that impact. Well, basically that's easy. You just don't do it at all, and then no one looks at any screens. But that doesn't solve the problem. So that's what the clever piece is to say, what are we trying to achieve? And maybe your model says, I think I know a way that I can actually drive revenues higher by having less screen time, but more specifically focused. You'd have to build a metric that said, am I actually achieving that one piece? In other words, it's not a one-size-fits-all, but absolutely you could have metrics that are somewhat different. But the core principle, measure your business, measure the right things, is a critical way to go.
Going back to your mentorship and your podcast, can you give any sort of more examples? Has that been quite a big topic going forward when it comes to leveraging technological change and being more socially responsible? Has that been quite a trend within your conversations within your podcast?
Yes. I don't screen the guests for my podcast on that criteria, so it comes up randomly. But it is absolutely there. Partly because that is what customers want, but also because generally most of the entrepreneurs that I work with are younger. They're usually in their 20s, and absolutely it is deeply a part of who they are. They very much want to do something which is positive. So they absolutely are taking that consideration in. And so what I'm coaching them on in the podcast, because the podcast is not one where I interview celebrity entrepreneurs, it's literally listening in on mentoring sessions with other early stage entrepreneurs. And I'm walking them through the how. How do I do this? How do I figure out if my idea is a good idea? At what point do I raise money? How do I attract talent? And those are the exact same challenges that you're going to have regardless of what your ultimate end goal is, whether it's social responsibility or whether it's not.
Very quickly, how do you choose those startups to speak to and coach and mentor?
I'm selfish in that I've been an entrepreneur for 40 years. Netflix was my 5th startup, and I actually did another one after that. And it's fairly intense, and I got to a point that I said I'm not quite prepared to be 7 by 24 all the time. So my release, my outlet, is basically working with other early stage companies. It's getting that experience of being able to sit at the table with really smart people, solve really hard problems, but get to leave. And so what I'm picking is not someone who has a specific technology or someone who has a specific social message. I'm looking for interesting people. And number one, the person I mentor, I have to like them. Simple metric, there you go, measurement, is if my phone buzzes at 11 o'clock at night and I look down and wince, that's a bad sign because things are going to happen and I've got to like the person. I'm also looking, since you asked, for a very specific set of personality traits. To be an entrepreneur, you have to have this tremendous sense of self-confidence. Like me, you're going to be told that will never work millions of times, and you have to believe so strongly that I am going to eventually solve this. But it has to be coupled with this humility that says I can still learn by listening. I'm not saying you listen and do, you listen and consider. I think Adam Grant describes it as listening like, arguing like you're right, but listening like you're wrong. And when I find someone with that set of skills who I genuinely like, that's who I want to work with, almost regardless of what the technology or the product they're trying to build is.
Being an entrepreneur is quite a sort of trendy thing amongst millennials these days, isn't it? But what they don't realize that in fact it's a 24-hour job. If you have that sort of passion project, would you say the same?
I actually am simultaneously encouraged and tremendously discouraged by the popularity of entrepreneurship these days, because I fear that people are getting into it for the wrong reasons. Back when I was a lad, 40 years ago, there was no such thing as entrepreneurship. I mean, certainly people were starting and building companies, but they didn't talk about it as being an entrepreneur. There was no college classes on entrepreneurship. There weren't TV shows and movies. And now there are, and it's become this popular thing. But I fear people get the wrong impression. They watch shows like Shark Tank, I don't know if anyone's seen that, and they think that what entrepreneurship is all about is pitching and raising money. But in fact, that is a very, very tiny thing that entrepreneurs do. Most of the time, you're right. They are struggling. They are trying to solve problems. They're trying to do things that haven't been done before. They're working really hard to try and test something. When it doesn't work, they abandon it and try something else. So if you find that interesting and compelling, it is the best career in the world. But if you're doing it with the objective of becoming wealthy or becoming famous or any of the things you see on television, that's not going to happen, or extremely unlikely to happen.
So let's go back to sort of some of the opportunities that startups have today in today's climate through a sort of more socially responsible outlook. Are there many opportunities out there? What's the landscape like at the moment?
Oh my goodness, it's infinite, the number of opportunities that are out there. And there's a simple way to find these things. It is simply to not try and solve the world's problems. Leave eradicating malaria to the Gates Foundation. The things that all of us can do is solve the problems that we see clearly in our own lives, in our own frustrations. I sometimes describe it as looking for pain, which is, what am I bumping into in my own life that doesn't work well? And those of us who are concerned about things, about screen time, who are concerned about cyberbullying, who are concerned about access to water, access to clean air, about foods, all these amazing social problems, if you see those things, those are the ones to address. And once you train yourself to see these problems and not just go, oh my gosh, isn't that terrible, but really think about it. Why is that occurring? Who is it occurring to? You can't help it. Things pop into your mind. But then here's the trick, is that it's one thing to recognize the problems. The trick is to say, how could I fix that? And then not dream about it, but figure out some quick, cheap, and easy way you can begin to take that first step of understanding whether your intuition is actually real. I mean, the single biggest thing that I see for people not following through is they think too much. You have this great idea, wouldn't it be amazing if we could do this app which controls screen time, whatever it was. But then you keep thinking, and you go, oh my gosh, imagine once we get to here. And then when we have 1 million users, just think how powerful that'd be. And here's, we could add this on, and we could add this service, and we could, pretty soon you're designing your own branded t-shirts. But what a real entrepreneur does is they don't overthink it. Almost as soon as the idea pops into their head about here's a possible way to solve this problem, they're immediately changing gears and saying, is there some way today, tomorrow, that I can validate this idea? I mean, just to give you a quick example of what I mean, way back at the beginning when we had the initial idea for Netflix, which back in 1998 when it launched was not a streaming service like you know today. It was a company which actually mailed movies on DVDs to people. So pretty antiquated. But one day when we were in a car, Reed Hastings, my partner, and I had the idea maybe we could do video rental by mail. Okay, interesting idea. You'll come to a website, you'll choose a movie, we'll mail it to you. But then we did not say, okay, let's rush to the office and build a business plan. Let's begin dreaming about where it could go from here. Let's put together a pitch deck. None of those things. We turned our car around mid-drive and drove into town to figure out whether this idea had any merit at all. We went to try and buy a DVD. We couldn't find one, so we bought a music CD and mailed it to ourselves. And found out in 24 hours whether the idea was a good one or not. And that's what you have to do. So when you have these ideas about how to change the world, stop dreaming. Begin thinking about what could I do tomorrow that'll take me one step further down the path of trying to figure out if it's a good idea or not. Because the reality is, that idea you come up with, it's a terrible idea. I mean, I don't even know what these ideas are, but I can tell you they're all terrible ideas because every idea is a bad idea. And our job as entrepreneurs is to take that bad idea and figure out what was wrong with it. Because that begins the process of insight that leads to the next thing you try and the next thing you try. And in fact, that little DVD experiment did lead us to launch a company. Yes, the idea that everyone told me would never work, they were right. It didn't work. But that was fine. I expected that. And for a year and a half, we tried one thing after another until eventually we found something that did work. And that process, the stop thinking and start doing, is the same regardless of what your idea is, whether it's good for the planet, good for people, good for mental health, or just good for capitalism.
So I suppose at the end of the day, you have no idea where things are going to lead, so you might as well start somewhere.
I'm sorry?
You have no idea where things are going to lead, so you might as well start somewhere.
Oh, there, you should clap for that. That is absolutely the point. You have there you go. I'll get it for you one way or the other. No, it is so completely true. I mean, you know, any of us who've spent any time in a corporate environment have been in a brainstorming meeting. You know, where you're in a room and the moderator gets up and says, first some ground rules, there is no such thing as a bad idea. Well, that is garbage. There's no such thing as a good idea. You have no idea where it's going to lead. This whole idea of this eureka moment, of this epiphany, where suddenly you've had the idea, it all becomes clear, is garbage. It doesn't work that way. You don't go, I can't get a cab, and boom, there's Uber. Can't make my rent. Put an air mattress down. Boom, there's Airbnb. You have no idea where it's going to go. All those ideas are starting points. And if you don't start, you never figure out where the idea wants to take you. My most recent startup was a data analytics product. And when my co-founders and I sat down, our objectives were totally different. We kind of liked the way we had come up with to do this analytic product, but we thought it was going to be a lifestyle business. It was going to be something that was small, that we could have a real life while we were building it. It would be all self-serve on the web. But lo and behold, the product did not agree with us. It didn't want to be an end-user product. It wanted to be a corporate product. It didn't want to be sold for $79 a month. It wanted to be sold for $79,000 a month. It didn't want to be sold on the web. It wanted to be sold with people carrying briefcases and wearing suits. And you never would have figured that out if we hadn't started.
There you go. How do you think we need a more sort of collective movement towards entrepreneurship, innovation, sustainability? Do you think that's needed today?
Oh, I'll be contrarian. No. I don't like the idea of collective movements because that implies that you're doing something for some reason which isn't inherent in it. I can't be articulate about this, but a movement says you're trying to convince people to do something for the good of doing it. And I'm not saying what we're talking about isn't good to be doing. I'm just saying that shouldn't be the only reason we do it, that there's absolutely no reason why it doesn't exist side by side with the fundamental drivers that have driven entrepreneurs forever, which is that there is a way to take a problem and solve it, and do so in a way which is sustainable. This is not, at least in my opinion, social entrepreneurship is not philanthropy. It is not, I'm going to do this, nobody cares, so give me money so I can build a product that nobody wants. No. If there's no margin, there's no mission. That you have to do something which is sustainable, but I'm not talking about the environmental sustainability or socially sustainable. I'm talking about economically sustainable. There's no reason we can't apply the exact same rules that make any type of entrepreneurship a tremendously valuable service to society and have it be applied to problems which benefit us all rather than hurting us. And what's wonderful about this is, first of all, that I'm not asking you to do things dramatically different. There's no secret, separate formula. It's learning these basic blocking and tackling, there's an Americanism, these basic skills that have been being taught for years. And recognizing that we're in the great spot right now because consumers want this. They want to take actions which don't hurt themselves, that don't hurt their children, that don't hurt the society at large. And they're recognizing that what might be a fairly decent-sized movement now is going to be an even bigger movement in the future. And those are exactly the type of things that we should be doing. And we do them for the right reasons.
I'm pretty sure there are quite a few budding entrepreneurs on our audience today. What sort of advice do you have for them going forward when it comes to sort of leveraging this technological change and the changes that we're seeing in terms of society going forward as well? What sort of advice do you have for them?
Yeah, it's a great question, and thank you, because for someone who does want to see us make progress in areas that are positive for the world, and whether that's mental health, whether that's environment, which is one of my personal passions, or anything, I would love to see that happen. And the advice here is it only happens if we start. And I want people to stop thinking. I want them to start doing these things. I want them to have the ideas and try them. I want to move forward. I want to make progress. I mean, I think I may have missed the question, but I certainly believe that's the ultimate message here, that this is not something separate and different, I guess.
Well, that was going to be my next sort of question. Yeah, what is your key message for our audience today when it comes to digital wellness, what we're seeing in terms of leveraging technology and the different trends going forward as well? What key message have you got for us? Your words of wisdom, please.
What is my key message? That is a really hard one, I suppose. Don't be scared. If you are out thinking, wow, I'd love to do something in this space, and you're not sure if it's going to work, that's fine. That is always the case. I don't want you to be scared. I've heard every possible reason there is for someone who has an idea for them not starting. I have to learn how to code. I have to quit my job and I'm not ready to do that. I have to graduate. I have to find a technical co-founder. I have to raise. I've heard every single one of them. And first of all, they're all not true, but they all stem from the same place, which is fear. And it's not like we are cowards, because it's this very natural human fear of not wanting to make a fool of yourself. Nobody wants to do something they're not quite sure it's going to work. We don't want to get things wrong. We don't want to fail. But it's very, very much like learning a second language, which I imagine most people here have learned a second language. But as you recognize, you don't learn the second language by studying it in books or taking classes or even listening to tapes. You really learn to become fluent in a second language by speaking it, by screwing up your courage as a grown adult, walking into a coffee shop and opening your mouth and sounding like you are 6 years old. And there's some people who are willing to make a fool of themselves, who are willing to go in and say, I know I'm going to sound stupid. This is how I learn. And there's another class of people who stand outside on the sidewalk rehearsing, oh wait, is that the subjunctive or is that the, what's the vocabulary word? And they put the whole sentences together and they walk in and say the first sentence and then all of a sudden they're totally lost. The same thing goes for you. Stop rehearsing in your head. Stop practicing. Stop taking classes. Stop listening to tapes. The only way you really learn how to do this, the only way you really make progress, the only way you really overcome that fear is by doing it. Can I add one more thing? And the key to overcoming that fear is there is a technique. I'm not going to get up here and preach, just do it, because I recognize it's not easy. There is absolutely a technique, but the technique is breaking it down into small enough parts that the failures are tiny, and the failures are minor, and the failures are non-consequential. And once you learn that, once you try something tiny and you go, oh my gosh, everyone's going to be so upset or so embarrassed, and you do it, it doesn't work, and the world doesn't end, you go, well, that wasn't so bad. And you try another one and go, oh, that wasn't so bad. And then finally, when you have 40 years of practice, you don't even think twice about it on taking big risks. And you're not scared because you realize is that if you've picked your tests carefully, the consequences of failure are so tiny, and you can make really very, very fast progress toward making your idea real. And that ultimately is the objective.
We do have I was going to wrap it up there, but we've got a couple of minutes. So I actually wanted to ask you, you've traveled the world a few times over, I'm sure. Do you feel that one size fits all when it comes to entrepreneurship and the different sort of cultures and nationalities? Is there sort of a standard model for entrepreneurship worldwide?
No, that's such an interesting question, isn't it? Because you brought up the C word, which is culture, which is such a critical piece of making your company successful. Because this issue I was saying before of having the idea and just starting it, that's an individual progress. But eventually, as you're trying to move forward, you need to enlist people to help you. And the culture you create in your company is a critical component to its success, its ability to move forward. And people have a different idea about culture. They tend to think, I'm not accusing you of thinking this, but of suggesting that there might be some simple rule for what the culture should look like in a startup. And there isn't. Culture is extremely individual. And more importantly, culture is observational, not aspirational. Culture is not something that you sit down with your co-founders and go to a conference room and say, let's design what we want our company culture to be. And, oh, we all work hard. That's a good one. And, oh, we're all honest. That's a good one. No jerks. So that's another good one. Okay, we're done. Make some posters. Put them up in the break room. No. Anyone who has children knows that the more important thing is how you act, not what you say. And so culture has to be true to who you are. I mean, how you treat your co-founders, how you make decisions, how you communicate, how you treat your customers. That's what culture is. And the trick is to be true to the pieces of your culture you think are important. I mean, for example, Netflix, I do not necessarily model this one, because again, it's individual. It's by the way that Reed Hastings and myself treated each other and acted, was founded on a very different principle than a lot of companies. One was radical honesty, That's how Reed and I treated each other. Say whatever we thought, never really try and spare someone's feelings. And that has permeated the culture in now a almost 10,000 person company. But the other one was this critical thing we called freedom and responsibility. And anyone who is in the process of working in a startup knows what this is like, where you have only a handful of people and you have problems way bigger than you could handle just with a handful of you. You certainly can't say, here's what to do, here's how to do it, check in with me. All you can say in a startup is, you see that mountain over there? I'll meet you there in 2 weeks. And here's what you guys need to have gotten done. And then I go on my own path, and I trust that in 2 weeks, when I get to the top of the mountain, everyone will be there waiting for me with the things accomplished they needed to have accomplished. That's the responsibility part. But at the same time, they're going to solve the problems as they see fit, based on what they encounter on the way, based on the things they need to get done. I'm not going to get in the way. That's the freedom part. And what was amazing for us was how powerful that was for attracting and retaining great people, because people love to be treated like an adult. They love to be given responsibility, because what happens, of course, in a bigger company is someone gets to the mountaintop late and the CEO says, oh, this isn't good. Oh, we need status reports. And everyone goes, oh, status reports. Okay. And then someone gets on time, but they overspent. And goes, oh, this can't happen. We need to have pre-approvals and any expense over, and here's some guidelines on what to spend. And pretty soon all the people who you wanted working for you are going, this is ridiculous. And you're left with people who don't have good judgment anyway. But that's Netflix, and it works for us. And it's finding this culture for your own company that is critical.
We are going to have to leave it there. A truly inspiring conversation. We cannot thank you enough for being with us here in Idra, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. Thank you so much to Marc Randolph. Thank you.
Thank you.